Hi, welcome to A Work in Progress. My name is Santi Feaster, and today we're talking about viewing Icelandic culture through an intergenerational lens, where we dissect our individual experiences as Black and mixed foreigners in Iceland and identify with those experiences that mirror Black Icelandic people. Okay, Jeff, Dory?
Thank you, Santi.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
it's a pleasure to be here and just talking about these really important topics and then also just our experience.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity to get our voices, and I think it's great to be able to talk about what's going on in the world today, especially out in Iceland.
Mm-hmm. And today we're going to be talking about the fire that happened on June 25th in the west of Reykjavik. Did you both hear about that?
Yes, of course, and it's incredibly tragic. And again, another one of these timely events, something that it's another precipice that we get to look over and hopefully, leap off of together so that we can start fixing these things. I was just recently having a conversation with a friend, an American friend, someone else who has this, idealized version of what it's like to be in Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I said, yeah, Iceland has a different type of racism and xenophobia that isn't necessarily fatal. Well, then this happened.
Yeah.
It's the hiding of people and the invisibility of people that is actually quite dangerous and apparently life-threatening.
Mm-hmm. And just to give people who don't know about the situation a bit of an overview, apparently there was a house that is known to be in very poor condition, and there are 73 people registered as living in this house. And unfortunately, I guess you could say it came to a head this week, and the consequences were fatal for some people.
Well, this is I'm not really surprised coming from the United States. I moved here in 2002, and before I came to Iceland, I worked in a McDonald's franchise, and most of the people who worked there were foreign from a lot of South American countries, and a lot I'm hearing about from this particular incident were very similar in the States, where you have uh, a lot of foreign workers in one place sharing a place. They're all low wage workers. Uh, for many different reasons were in the United States. So I'm not really surprised on hearing what had happened. It's tragic. Part of this overall capitalist system as it's come to be defined right now. And that's just the way companies view profit and profit motive is very different than when even I had studied in college management, business management, and business administration. And one of the things that had changed noticeably in what I had learned in school was a business's directive. One of the main directives was towards the consumer, was to make a better product. And that had switched to how much profit can I make? And then it's profit over profit. And it doesn't really matter what the product is or how good the product is. It matters if I beat last year's profit. And if you continue on that model, you start cutting wages, cutting hours, you automate more, you do everything you can. And then you go to basically you can find. And I mean, there comes a point where you can't cut anymore. And that's what I mean by the capitalist model the way it is now. We see this over and over again with the banking institutions. So the banking institutions and what had happened with the collapse, with them selling bad products that were destined to fail, is the same thing with every other industry. How cheap can we do this? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing in business, but there comes a point of, are you giving, is it safe, and is it a quality product you're putting out? So.
And I also think we need to address the Icelandic system of with these corporations that are exploiting workers and basically putting profitability over everything else. With the Kennetala dumping, it's also a really big thing right now where Messin, they just reopened their restaurant, but they still haven't paid their old employees their wages, and they hired new staff. So of course this is an issue, but many businesses, they continue to do this repeatedly. They exploit people, they drop one Kennetala, they open another, and they're allowed to do it again and again and again.
Yes.
And this is in Iceland, this is the first time I've heard of something like this. And a lot of these things are, from what I've seen so far, are through word of mouth. Friends tell me, don't work here. I worked here in 2012 and this happened, and they got a new Kennetala and they did it again. So this is very unique, this is very troubling, and it allows for people to be exploited, and it allows for corporations to continue with their same scheme.
This is
It's accountability, really. It's, I think a lot of what we see, a lot of things that are happening are intersectional. And there's a very clear disconnect of accountability when it comes to business and policing. When you remove that accountability, of course there's gonna be issues and problems. When you remove regulation, for instance, regulations don't just pop up from nowhere. There's a reason for it. And so when you have that foundation, that's just, to me, that's the inevitable outcome, these kind of outcomes.
Jeffrey, you mentioned 3 words that are constantly popping up in my consciousness and my conversations: intersectional, accountability, and you just said another one that it'll come to me, but particularly the intersectionality, foundation, that was the other one. Oppression is oppression is oppression. And I'm not saying that Iceland is an oppressive place. So, let's get that squared away. Iceland is an incredible country with an incredible opportunity to live up to the memes, to really embody all of the things that people want it to be, and specifically Icelanders want it to be. So I'll start with that. Like, I'm here for several reasons, and a big one is that this country is amazing. But when we talk about foundation, it's rather shaky. And that is because of the trajectory from poverty to where the country is now. It's been incredibly fast, and it's built upon kind of following a bunch of other timelines and ideas, what worked for Europe, what worked for America, that kind of thing, or it worked, right? Because it's falling apart now, right? So yeah, the foundation is shifting. And so the country needs to be able to shift with that. So part of the intersection is race and, foreign, caring for foreigners and foreign labor. So being able to shift with what's happening is clearly of utmost importance, and keeping people safe and dealing with the shifting of what's happening in business. We can't continue on the same path.
Go off on what your point. I think when we talk about these issues, there's a lot of, well, why is it important, or why should I care?
Mm-hmm.
let's get to the. It's very clear when you take care of people and you give them a vested interest in something. So the foreigners that come into Iceland, if they understand or they feel that they're have a part to play in Iceland's growth or prosperity, um, uh, you're more willing to invest in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and for why would Iceland care about its foreign workers? Well, United States, and that's my only point of reference. Foreigners built the United States. A lot of foreign businesses that many people take for granted, Google, even Apple. Steve Jobs, his parents were immigrated to the United States. If you ignore, see, it's always the other. This is the problem in the psyche that I felt here in Iceland, even just working here in Iceland. It's always kind of like, we're Iceland. And when you think like that, you don't see any value in the other.
No, it's not a team. And
Exactly.
this is a team effort. There's no way to jump, and Iceland can never claim that they did it without foreign money or labor ever. That's not how these big economies are built. They're built through the world. They're not built in a vacuum. So yeah, I hear you.
Yes, I mean, like I said, again, coming from, I mean, I've worked in like the hospitality industry, and foreigners make up a lot of that. And, you know, I've talked to many different people from many different countries. Now, I didn't come to Iceland for financial, because I had a problem in the States financially, or I was looking for a better life. I came because of marriage. And my first experience coming here was, I was very impressed by their grasp of English, which I hadn't expected really, except for my limited experience with my Icelandic wife's family. But that I thought was pretty cool. But when I went to an employment agency, she said, "Do you speak Icelandic?" I said, "No." I said, "Do you write Icelandic?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, you might as well just go back." Which I thought, wow, all right, that's pretty blunt. But
it's a very narrow point of view.
I mean, the point, and then it was confusing to me because I'm like, you just asked me everything in English. It's not like we can't communicate. And I wasn't going for a doctor position. So I thought that was interesting, but I kind of understood. It's kind of that like, look, we're Icelandic. This is our identity. You don't speak or write the language, get the hell out. And there's a disconnect. Every country I know of has a foreign population that is its foundation. It's what really keeps things moving. In the United States, the immigration or the immigrants that are there put $3 billion worth of taxes into the system, which they are not allowed to benefit from. So when you don't understand that, when the general population has no idea of their foreign population, which is very prevalent in Iceland, no one knows why you're here. They see you here, they wonder why you're here, they don't understand why it might be good for you to be here. So then you bring up policies and people are like, no, any foreigners, I don't care about any foreigners, what do I care about this? And I think that is a lack of media representation, media understanding. The media covers things that aren't really good for the public to be aware of. Media is a big problem as well. They push stories, they push narratives when they should be pushing information.
Well, even case in point with how the fire was covered, you know, it was a bunch of foreigners. And then, you know, the police and the fire department had such a hard time dealing with it. It's like, what? There were 70 people crammed into a home. Some of them are dead. People, you know, don't connect to the idea that they were human beings, but the humanity of the fire department and the police department take precedence over what went on in that house. and why it was packed and why it was like this and why these people even came here, what their circumstances were. All of that is just like, whoop, you know. So again, that is also within the intersection, because we're also talking about the psyche and the consciousness of a culture that developed really quickly out of poverty. So I have a lot of compassion for that, a lot of empathy for that. You know, I come from 3 genocides, you know, I'm Black, part Native American, and Jewish. So I understand coming from a place of trauma and then fast forwarding into a different reality. But in this particular instance, there is so much more information available. We are in the digital age. You know, you have people present and ready to talk. So dealing also with the psyche and the psychology of the culture as a whole, because this happens Icelander to Icelander, or I should say white Icelander to white Icelander, where it's like, oh, what you're talking about is making me uncomfortable. That's too much. Moving on to the next subject. So, you know, that's a part of why it's not just racism. It's not just xenophobia. It's also it's woven into the culture that, you know, when something is uncomfortable, I'm saying I'm talking about it, but I don't really want to feel or experience what you're saying. So that's a piece that I've taken just observing life here.
And we actually spoke about that with the Icelandic saying "tetaretast," how it's a bit gaslighting. It's like, oh, well, it'll work itself out. We don't need to think about it. We don't need to talk about it. And like you said, we need to get to the why. Why were 73 people allowed to be registered to this home? Why was the home allowed to be occupied by anyone in the condition that it was in? Why was the company that was shoving these people into this unlivable condition, why was this all allowed? It's at this point we're unfortunately past the point of the what. It is the why. Why did this happen? And now you know, unfortunately some people are dead. So now we need to look at the companies that allowed this, the infrastructure that allowed this. Why are there these loopholes where this can happen? Why do they need to make this much money just off of people's housing that they are allowed to do this? I think people an admin for a Facebook group, and some people automatically, as soon as they heard about this house, apparently it's been a problem for some people in the neighborhood, it automatically became, oh, they're foreigners, they're drug users, maybe it was one of them, you know, it automatically became them and what they did, and not why are they in this situation to begin with. What is happening in society that these companies can rent a house or buy a house and shove people in it, cycle them through, use them and abuse them, and then kick them out? Why is this happening in such an advanced society like Iceland, where we're supposed to be progressive and everything is really good here, but we still have this dark underbelly of foreigners being abused? I mean, it happens all the time. It's always in the news in some form. I mean, it's happened to me. It's happened to people I know. And I would say they're almost all foreigners that this has happened to. So why is this exploitation happening? Why is it being spoken about? Why is it vocal? Why is it common knowledge? And why is nothing changing?
Now, something to pick up on what you're saying, politics usually plays a negative role. You know, frame of reference is the United States, okay? And it was interesting to me, you know, we have a president, Donald Trump, who, you know, he goes, you know, foreigners, they're bringing in their worst and blah, blah, blah. And then when they looked into his businesses, he employs a lot of illegal workers. So, you know, it's this kind of like, if you don't know about it, we can get away with it. And I think that is where, again, I come back to the media. Who owns the media? Who runs it? Because the media informs the people. And I think most people are decent. Most people are decent. Like, if you sit down at a restaurant, have a great, well, this was made by children who are forced to make this food, you might not stand for it. You would want to change. You wouldn't go to that establishment. But if you don't know, and that is kind of where you see these things happen. Like a while ago, there was a protest for different companies in the States, Old Navy, a clothing company, and they were hiring workers in terrible
sweatshops.
The same question was brought up with Apple and their products. When people know, they might not be comfortable with that. But since most people don't know, it's easy to just pick up on negative stereotypes or whatever. So yeah, all foreigners here are drug dealers and criminals and whatnot, but they don't know what brought them here. How did they get here? Like you were saying,
but my question
what
is,
companies?
You know,
but it's a significant amount of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, I would say this cognitive dissonance because when you do know what changes, for example, like with iPhones, when the whole thing came out about how I believe in China, people who make iPhones, they were getting sick from creating these phones. They were committing
They're in
suicide, couldn't get
diapers,
to work so much.
no bathroom breaks.
What happened? People still went out and bought that new iPhone 7, 8, 9, 10. We saw actually, I don't have an iPhone. I do contribute to probably the exploitation of child labor because I have a Android, and I'm sure there's Cobalt or something in there. So once again, we still contribute because these are a part of our society, things that you kind of need to have, a cell phone. When we all saw Super Size Me and we saw what McDonald's does to your body, granted, I don't eat it every day for 3 months straight, 3 square meals a day. We saw that and you went, it's not good for you, but like, I don't eat it all the time. And you rationalize these things. Just like you said with clothes, you may know it comes from a sweatshop, but you go, well, I don't buy clothes that often. And I don't want there to be a sweatshop, but what can I do? And, so it becomes, it's out of my hands. Therefore I'm not causing the problem.
Well,
I'm just here benefiting from it.
Sante, the thing is that the attention brought to it puts a light on whatever companies. See, so whatever's done in the dark kind of is like a sin, it remains in the dark. When it's done in the open, then of course, like you said, we all kind of take responsibility. But that being said, once that information came out, the company had to address it. And when it comes to, say, for instance, iPhones, they had to change policies within those factories, and now they have to enforce them. And they've done procedures to change that particular thing. And when it comes to sweatshops, there were new laws created, at least I know in the United States, for certain checks and balances. People also, they decide whether they're going to buy or not. And for instance, cheap clothing is a weird industry. I looked into it myself just because I was curious. And cheap clothing is such, like, how do you get, well, not necessarily in Iceland, but in the United States, you can buy double of what you buy here in Iceland. In Iceland, I think and
you have to get to the why of that.
Because you think about what you're going to buy a little more.
But it's a strange dance because, it's a product that you can get very cheaply anywhere else, and it costs maybe 2 to 3 times as much often, depending on what it is and where it is. And it's a weird tango between like exploitation over here on the cheaper side, and then we're also exploitation over here as to why is there such a high tariff on it. So
Lori, this comes back to the switch in business models and economies. In the 1980s, there was a switch to like downsize, cut. There was an explosion of CEO pay, for instance. There are many good movies on the financial collapse that happened 5 years ago. And when you start looking into that, you see there was a switch of not paying people or laying people off, and then the remaining people had to pick up the slack. So you're working more, your wage hasn't necessarily changed, but the cost of everything continues to rise. So now you're working more, you don't have time to investigate. You're working overtime, you're working 2 jobs. You don't have time, the the public doesn't have time to know. And it became a very distinct, I keep thinking this movie thing, are you not entertained? It seems
Yeah.
the whole Roman thing, you know,
Yeah.
the news media becomes sensational. And, you know, you come home from work, you're looking at sensational news, you go to bed, you go to work again, you go to buy your clothes, you realize you don't have enough money, you buy the cheapest thing. You don't really care where it came from because you still got to continue on that rat race. You got to jump on that wheel.
Very
And
true.
and that is why a lot of these things happen, because, like, again, when people know, you know, people as a collective have the power. And if you're overworking your people, they don't have time to do anything. Things are not going to change. Who's going to change them? Governments have become political concubines. Governments have become political concubines. They prostitute themselves out for
He's not lying.
campaign contributions.
So, yeah.
You know, politicians used to be from the people. You know, Joe down the street had a cause and he ran for office. That's no longer the model, especially in the United States. It's
and
now,
then we have to look at the layers of depth to that, to who Joe the politician was. You know, if it's really of the people, then it's going to reflect the fact that it's not just white men.
Well, no, they come from
Iceland has a specific new challenge, and it's actually not that new, but just within the layers of awakening of really embodying. That's the thing, you know, to pay lip service, like we have all these unions. Well, what's happening in the workforce? There's still these, you know, there's still so much exploitation.
And I feel that's very unique to Iceland, because like we were talking about, if, like you said, when people know, they generally they have some opposition, they want to do something to change that. They don't want to contribute to this problem. And so now we know about what happened at the restaurant that closed down, that didn't pay their workers. So we all know living in Iceland is not cheap. I cannot imagine going to work every day knowing you have not been paid, you don't know when you will be paid, but you still show up to work. The restaurant closed down, they still have not been paid. The restaurant reopened, probably under a different Kennetala. They hired new staff, and the old staff has not been paid. So now what people are doing are they're affecting their money. We as locals know what's going on. Some people who don't care will probably still go eat there. I will not. But tourists, they're aimed at tourists. Tourists they're not tuned into the local circuit, especially when they come for a week and they want to eat at a nice place and they see, oh, okay. But like where people are leaving reviews on their web pages, so people know not to go there. They're stiffing their ex-employees. They're probably, what's to say they're not going to do the same to the staff they have now, because right now for them, nothing has to change. They can do this again, close down again, let the scandal blow over and open up. Why not?
It's such an interesting Cliff's Notes on America here. It really is. It's like, okay, yeah, we see how they did that. We can just keep doing that. And then it becomes kind of almost an addiction issue. It's like a combination of like almost like a teenage kind of not level, but like on the timeline of America, you know, like that sort of thinking. And then also like, okay, no, we have to be able to get that kind of money, to get that kind of status, to get that kind of power. So we have to keep doing it, right? We have to keep doing it that way. And, by looking at what's crumbling down around us, the answer is emphatically no.
Well,
Iceland has a chance to do something to help shape a different model. And I think that's scary. especially since, just coming out of poverty and the space that Iceland occupied in the world, which was, nearly invisible. And now everyone's focus is here. So
Totally.
what,
Dory, I'm gonna piggyback on what you said as far as the United States history. So in my business education, history is prologue. So if you want to know your way forward, you got to know where you came from. And it seems like the dissolution of unions, the lack of power for unions, which didn't just come out of nowhere. Unions came out because workers were being exploited.
Children.
When I look at the beginning of the 20th century in the United States, and then it seems like it's come back now, where you had the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, these people with insane amount of money, and the business practices that led to that kind of money. It seems to be the same thing happening again.
Yeah, you only get that kind of money from exploiting people. Period. End of sentence.
Itself.
But here's the thing.
Here we are.
So then, things were put into place. Unions came about. There's good and bad to unions, but better to have them than not, I believe. Things came about, and the United States came into one of its most profitable times in its history, when the tax rate for the richest people was 70 or 80%, even 90%. And people were making great wages, and they were investing back into the system. And this blows my mind why these intelligent, educated business CEOs seem to forget about well. And this comes from the guy who made Ford cars. Henry Ford said to business leaders, he said, you gotta pay your people enough so they can buy the car. Otherwise, you're building cars, who's buying? They don't have money. So what's the point? And this is the kind of disconnect these people, you get to a certain level of making money where you're totally disconnected from reality about what it is, how much you need to live.
Or you have just enough credit to take your vacations, even though you're deeply in debt, but you feel like you have to forget about, it's like, I can't know about other people's problems. I have my problems, but I have just enough so that I can, go over here and forget, and then I can post my pictures and look like I have money. So,
Speaking of credits, child, I just got my first credit card. And so I saw, I was on the website, and so my limit was 25,000 krona, which is not a lot. And it said like, do you want to increase the limit? And I saw you could literally just slide it up, and I said, oh my God, this is dangerous. What?
That's very dangerous.
It was like, to me, this is, it's scary because you have this power over your own choice, but it's so easy. It's like 2 clicks, and I could go from 25,000 to 100,000, and the next day you have the line of credit.
And did that not happen here? Did that not happen to the whole entire country?
It's so shocking because they allow you are like you put yourself in this position, but they know when they give you this credits, what's going to happen, especially in the economy. It's going to take you forever to pay it back, but once they have you, you're stuck. So it doesn't really matter. Because at the end of the day, okay, I still need to eat. Maybe I can increase my limit more, or my kid needs this. I can increase it more. I'll pay it later. I'll do it later. I'll work harder. And you're in a hole at this point.
Well, I was taught about credit from my parents that it's a very dangerous thing. And I got my first credit card when I was 17. And I'll never forget me using it, because I kind of kryptonite in my pocket. I carried it around for like 6 months. And at the time I was playing guitar. I walked into a guitar shop. I saw this great guitar I wanted. And it was $600 over what I could afford. So I go to the guy, I said, he's like, you want to play it? I was like, yeah. So I'm playing it. Oh, this is great. And he goes, oh yeah, it's $1,200 or something. I'm like, it's too much for me. I says, I'll have to come back or save up or whatever. He goes, he goes, you said, why, yes, I do. he said, well, well, you can make
He said,
payments.
"Do you have a credit card?"
Yeah.
Okay.
And he goes, well, you can make payments, a little bit every month,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you can have that guitar now. And I was 18 or so years old, and I'm like, yes, I can have that
I can
guitar
have it
now.
now. Mm-hmm.
Who knows what's going to happen in 6 months?
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you something. If that's not really what's happening now,
Hmm.
I mean, with coronavirus and like everything got shut down, people are saving money. It's like you go,
Yeah. And sleeping and spending actual quality time and, reflecting on what's actually important.
Actually
So,
thought people were it was a time where you couldn't spend money in your everyday frivolous activities, like for
mhm.
example going to Starbucks. But I noticed people were online shopping a lot more.
Yeah,
For me, living in Iceland, I just don't do it. It's
no,
a
it's too
headache.
expensive.
It's really expensive, and I feel like the thing is the instant satisfaction of that. Like in the U.S.,
Mhm.
when you order on Amazon, it comes the next day. As soon as you make that order, you're like waiting at the window. Where's my package? I want this
Mhm.
stuff that I had to get. And with coronavirus, you're in the house all day on your
Yeah.
computer, talking with your friends, like, oh, I want to get this thing, and oh, I'll get that thing, and you got it, you got it, you got it. You're buying, you're buying, you're buying, and at once it's over, you're still stuck in the house with all this new stuff, and you realize
Mhm.
you don't need it. But
Mhm.
in
well,
that
here's
moment, you
see,
needed it and you wanted it.
but that's the way Western cultures a
Hmm.
lot, and now Eastern cultures are about. It's like, what do you have? I never cared about labels. I just cared if it looked good. Unfortunately, my tastes always go to the expensive. If you put two things in front of me without me knowing what they are, I'll pick the more expensive one. I just see it. I don't know. But the thing is the culture, you're working hard. Most people are working harder than they have, or maybe two jobs or whatever. So what does that do? You want to enjoy the fruits of your labor to some
Well,
degree.
I'm going to take exception with that word, enjoy.
Hmm.
What this really is mitigating pain. You are mitigating
Hmm.
Okay,
lack. You are
that's a good way. I
mitigating.
like how you did. Yes,
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 that's mitigation. It is not enjoyment. This
yes.
deep hole of debt that we fall into
Hmm.
is trying to keep up with some kind of, it's not really an ideal, but I'll use that word, that doesn't please anyone.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well,
So,
it's a
I mean, it's
collective.
mitigation,
What
it's
I
not
was getting
enjoyment.
at, Dory, what I was getting
Mhm.
at is it's a collective of
And I'm not
the
upset with you.
society. It's a collective of what the society values and
Yeah.
how we view success. Um,
Hmm.
I often look around Iceland. It blows me away in Iceland. It's like 300,000 people, and I look and I see $100,000, or at least in the States, Tesla driving, or I see Porsche SUVs, and I'm thinking to myself, why?
Yeah. Why
I
and
mean, no,
how?
really. I mean, it's
Hmm.
300,000 people.
Hmm.
In New York, when I drove through New York, I know New York is like a financial freaking capital. Every other car on my way driving into New York or driving from New York, I see a Ferrari, a Bentley, a Jaguar, a this or that. I understand that because mostly they're bankers from New York driving somewhere else.
Hmm.
Um, in Iceland, it always
Westchester. Yeah.
the
Long
the
Island.
the
Yeah.
the flash of that cash
Hmm.
in a country that has 300,000 people seems to me, because my impression of Iceland was really very real. Um, like not having to call my doctor,
Hmm.
Dr. Smith or
Yeah.
Dr.
Yeah.
Belderson or whatever. They didn't
Sion.
really
Yeah.
say doctor. You don't have to tell me
By
I'm
their
a
name.
doctor.
Yeah. Or
I
they
love
introduce
that.
themselves by their first name too. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that about Iceland. I love the
Hmm.
not fawning over celebrity.
Hmm.
I love that. And the other part, the kind of overt flashing of where your status is. I live on the hill.
Mhm.
Oh, you muted your mic, Jeffrey.
Oh, that was,
Yeah.
well, living on the hill, and I remember driving through, dropping my daughter off at a friend's house. I was like, how much do these houses cost? Because in the States, owning a house is a part of that middle class
Mm-hmm.
thing. You own a house. You
Mhm.
don't live in an apartment. You
You're
own
moving
a
on up.
house.
You own a
Okay,
house.
and you own a piece of land because
Mhm.
traditionally wealth was generated by the land you own, which really hasn't changed. Okay,
Mhm.
do you own the land? As a matter of fact, McDonald's makes more money off of real estate than it does their restaurants.
Same with the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like here in Iceland, you don't really own anything. You can't own anything. It's out of reach for the average person. So, what was I saying? Well, for a smaller country, I'm seeing where the values are.
Mhm.
Mhm.
See,
And you see where they're
what's
shifting.
success?
Mhm.
Success would be having that house on the hill that's 100 million kroner
Mhm.
and driving an SUV, I guess, an expensive SUV. So if that's the middle class's aspiration, that will drive how things are formulated, what's accepted,
Yeah, and it continues the wheel. So even though people will turn and reflect and say, "Oh wow, that's not right,"
Mhm.
it's so easy to redirect the attention to sliding the bar up so that you have now $100,000 in credit and
Mhm.
not 25.
Mhm.
It's really easy to turn your attention away from things that are uncomfortable and don't seem like fun.
And not
So,
only that, it furthers the cycle of abuse. For example, in Iceland, like what we're talking about now,
mhm,
this once again, the why. Why did this happen? It's about money.
mhm,
The math was someone said 3.5 million a month that the company got from having all these people in this house and charging them each 60 60,000, something like this. I can't recall. So, well, okay. So we have, this the why is the money. So once I have this 3.5 million, if I'm ripping these people off, I can say, okay, now I can go get this car. Granted, I didn't work for it. I scammed people out of it. I said, yeah, come live in my dad's house and you can work at this place. And they're in this dilapidated house. I don't care. I have my new car. I get to show it off to my friends. I get to post it on Instagram. So this exploitation is not just about they're bad people, they deserve it, and they're foreigners, they deserve it. It's about I'm getting money for it. So I need more of these people who don't know what I'm putting them through. And they tell their friends, oh, come to Iceland. Yes, it's expensive, but we work, and if you work hard you can save your money, and we have a place to live, and you'll live here with us. And they're put in this situation where, once again, the why, things are they're not great wherever you're from. And so, or maybe they are, or there's many reasons why you could come, but they often get people who are in struggling situations and they get them here. And yeah, what you have was bad, but this is a little better. It'll get
mhm.
better. It could be worse. And
Well,
I
Always
got my
that. Mhm.
3.5 million. I have my new car. Now there's, like, for example, this fire, 3 people are dead. What's going to happen? Is there going to be another Kennethalla dump in a new company in
so
6 months
something,
time?
what is the way forward? The way forward is, what is the incentive for companies to change business practices? The incentives would have to be from the government, which represents the people, hopefully,
Hmm.
to say, this is not cool. We don't want this to be our reputation. That's where a little the push would come from. What if I'm a business, why do I change? Because like I said, the media, if it's in the dark, no one knows, no one questions, it's fine. If it comes to light, then that's where the opportunity to change comes from. And
I
like
think
I
it's
said,
money. You have to stop giving them money. And in Iceland, when they can change their Kennethalla and change their name, this company no longer exists. So I don't know who what name they changed to, and they're doing it again. So once again, they have these loopholes where they can continue this cycle. You have to affect their money, because if they keep changing their name and doing what they're doing, and every 6 months there's a scandal, and I don't want something like this to happen again, where people are once again forced and exploited into the situation, and they're put into something that's dangerous. Apparently, people have known about this house. It was unlivable since 2015. 5 years later, 3 people are dead. Nothing has changed. They've been making money off of this house since then, at the very least. What are they going to do? Now, they can change their name, get a new Kenatella, and then 5 years from now, we're like, how did this happen? They just changed their name. They didn't change anything else. They continue to exploit people.
Well,
If we don't hit them where their money is, they
Mhm.
can continue to basically keep this cycle going.
And again, so where would the motivation to change come from? And that
I think you have to apply pressure to the governmental structures.
And you also,
Because
I believe you also have to appeal to the psyche of the people. The whole "this isn't my problem" thing is a huge problem. So, the simple fact of, the things that we're doing, you keep this in the media, you keep this conversation going, because you can change, the corporations can, to use that word again, mitigate and restructure as much as they want. If the people don't feel that this is important, if they don't feel that we are a part of the country, then exploitation can easily happen. It can keep happening as long as they can keep buying Porsches, So it's really about getting into the whole fabric of the society and really having these conversations and making sure that it doesn't just die in the water. So
well, see, that's the
I'm really grateful
Dory,
to be having this now.
well, Dory, that's kind of where I was coming from. The why should people care? I mean, there is, when you do the right thing, there's so much going on in my head right now, because I know this to be true just in my own life. But when you do the right thing, it does have a benefit back to the individual. And I believe the same applies for businesses. When you pay your people correctly, when you treat them fairly, it does pay you in dividends, in ways of cutting costs. Because if a worker feels I'm appreciated by the place I work, I'm looking at how to cut costs myself, looking how to make it better, looking how to sustain it and keep it going. But to Sante's point, if I can just squeeze the lifeblood out of this company and dump it, it becomes like a tissue, and I'm done with it. So there's no why invest to continue this. This is what I was saying from what I learned in my learning in university, was a change in business practice and their creed. Basically, is my business is not something to sustain, it's something to use temporarily. When CEOs can leave a business with a golden parachute, no matter if the business succeeds or fails, which is totally blowing my mind, then what's the point? I come to work, they said, Jeff, the sales are down. Yeah, whatever. Jeff, the warehouse burned. Ah, okay. Well, I'm leaving. I'll take my money. I'm gone. I'm good. I'll just go somewhere else. This is a systemic issue. Because if that is the way it is established, there is no incentive. If people don't know the business practices that are going on, don't care, and are too busy maybe to care, that system continues. So there are a lot of different things that come into place as far as information the public gets, the close ties that business and politics has. Because I'm friends with the guy who just burned this place to the ground. That's my buddy. I don't really want to go off on him. I don't want to restrict his ability to make a living, especially in Iceland since it's so small.
Wait, you're friends with the guy who owned the house?
Well, if I'm a politician, it's my job to enforce a rule. And
No, I'm saying, are you saying that you personally, or are you speaking in hypotheticals?
Hypothetical.
Oh, Jeffrey. You just saved yourself. I was like,
I don't know. I don't know. I may look like I have something. I have
No.
nothing to invest
I
in
mean,
that way, my dear.
that being said, though, just bringing it all together and seeing how we move forward, you know, it's like highlighted in these areas of like, you know, just reforming how things are done, you know, on the business end and the actual policy, but also I think inspiring people to have a different vision of what success and actual enjoyment and actual fulfillment is another piece of this, because it's all woven together. It doesn't, this system can't perpetuate itself. It needs us to push it. So, any thoughts on how we can?
I think it needs to be, like you were saying, there has to be a societal change where everyone feels this is on all of us. We are all in this together. Because the first thing that happened when, you know, the news of the fire broke was, oh, this is a bad house anyway. They're drug users. They're foreigners. They put themselves in this position. It was probably one of them that did it. The blame immediately was on them. Not why are there so many people in this house? Why is the house in such poor condition? Why is the company continuing to put people in this house? If we as a society, if this is the first, when we hear this, we ask, well, what were they doing? What, you know, what kind of people were they that they got themselves in this position? It'll always be us against our own people. I'm a working class person. It would never come to my mind that you wanted to die in a fire, that you wanted to live in conditions so bad that a fire could, you know, really just get out of control that fast and kill myself and two of my friends. That doesn't cross my mind. My mind is, why were people allowed to live in this house? We have, you know, standards. We have housing associations. The house was deemed unlivable in 2015. So yes, I do have questions of why. It's not about why these people live there. It's why did the city let this house stand?
Well, there you go.
Put this. If we are not asking ourselves these questions to the hand above, then we're going to continue to toil.
You know, and the thing is, you know, when you talk about the people, oftentimes when I see something that is wrong, or I feel is wrong, and I say something should be said, I don't want to be the one to say it. Not in this is, you know, I live here, but the lifeblood is not Icelandic,
Mm-hmm.
and ég er ekki talað rosalega vel íslensku. So
do you feel that gives you, that means you don't have a place to say something?
What I'm saying is where the voice comes from is important. So if you take, for instance, the Black Lives Matter movement, Black people have been saying the same thing for generations, but it's not really until a white person says it to another white. And in Iceland, a lot of times foreigners are always the outsider. There is that in the mind. And like when I asked what is it to be Icelandic? What is it to be Icelandic? Is it just what vested interest do I have in claiming Iceland as the thing I'm standing up for? What am I standing for Iceland? And if I'm standing for Iceland, is it standing for me? And as long as there's this other and foreign population and Icelanders, there's that disconnect as to why am I changing anything? So
no, I would say there's sadly there are Black Icelandic people that are othered in their own society, that are born here and that grew up here. And I think that is particular for me to mention, because we cannot ice them out as the others because they see themselves as Icelandic. I may view them as Icelandic because to me, if you're born here, raised here, you're Icelandic no matter what you look like. But we know for some Icelandic people, if you're not white, mainly that's like a big, but are you really? You know?
yeah. So
and I'm agreeing with what you're saying. I just don't want to box out Icelandic people of color.
Yeah, I mean, the voices have to be there. So it's like if I'm a part of a group and someone outside of that group, whether they, if I perceive they're outside of that group, they say, hey, this is not right. As much weight as somebody within what I perceive to be my group says, hey, this is not right. it hits the mind different, is what I'm saying. And until Icelanders themselves become uncomfortable or feel uncomfortable with it, then it's always your problem. It's the foreigner's problem. It's the Black person's problem. It's not my problem. I think a lot of that has to also do with, like we were saying, the economies that exist in the world today. People really, it's what Dory was talking about. It's pain management. It's pain management. It's working and not being fulfilled and trying to fulfill it in the wrong ways. The best way to fulfill that hole and that pain is to help someone else, is to be there for someone else. The best feeling I ever had in the world was standing up for someone who couldn't stand for themselves. I mean, that's one of the reasons I had, when I was younger, my idealism led me to sign up for military service. It was about standing up for people who couldn't stand for themselves. Many times I did that, and it cost me. I remember standing up for a kid who getting beat up in school, and I stood in between him and another guy and got knocked out. But the point was, I can't stand by while that's going on, because if I stand by, I might as well be condoning it.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, the idea that, as foreigners, as people of color, we are not helpless. We are not a burden. In fact, we are valuable team members to the success of this country and to the success of the world. So I would really love to see, moving forward, like I was talking about, the changes in policy, but also just the overall energy of we're doing this together, and just figuring out ways to make that happen in all these different arenas.
I think now is the apt time. We have tomorrow, Sunday is the protest. There's going to be, I believe it's a silent protest for the victims and the survivors of the fire. And I think it will be super, I hope there's a large turnout. And people really need to know that this is not a foreign problem. This is a problem for everyone who's living in Icelandic society right now, because this will keep happening. And right now there are no limits. So I think that needs to be very clear. There are no limits to who they can hurt. Right now they're getting vulnerable people, and who's next? So if we don't stop it now, it's a free for all.
So continuing the conversation, and I think it's important, and maybe we can get some other perspectives in the future on what this culture values and how we want to proceed forward. I've seen more protests in Iceland than I've seen even in the United States, my time living. I'm 50 years old, and I always saw Iceland as pretty proactive about speaking out on world affairs. So I think it's appropriate that we are here having this conversation. Hopefully we can continue.
So Sante, where's the protest going to be and what time?
So the protest is going to be tomorrow, or Sunday, at 12 p.m. at the address of, I believe, the address of the house.
Oh, wow.
Borstígur. I cannot say the name. So.
Okay, well,
but you can find it on Facebook, and we can post it as well. So,
Wow.
I hope there's a good turnout.
So. We did. But yeah, thank you.
We did it.